Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Yuna and today I'm going to be doing my first quarterly wrap up. It's kind of fun to think about doing a quarterly wrap up because I started this channel in January, I think like early January. So really, these are going to be the books that I have read since starting this channel. I can't tell if it feels like it's been more or less than 3 months since I've started this channel, but either way, today I'm going to be doing my quarterly wrap up, which means I'm going to be reviewing all of the books that I have read since the beginning of 2026 throughout the end of March. I ended up reading 14 books every month, which means that I have 42 books to get through, which is a lot of freaking books. So I'm gonna try and keep it quick. It's gonna be lightning round. It's gonna be like speed dating. In order to keep it quick, I'm going to be doing these in a yes, if, no, if sort of form. It's gonna be sort of reminiscent of the yes, no, maybe type of reviews. I'm gonna have a book and I will say yes if you like XYZ, no if you don't like XYZ. And I will try to keep it very quick, very succinct. And in order to try and keep this timely, I'm going to be grouping together anything that's a series. So if I have a trilogy or a quartet, I'm going to be reviewing them just as a whole unit. Just in case any of you are out there thinking that 42 sounds like an insane number to have gone through in the fourth quarter of the year, I just want to point out that a good number of these books are actually novellas, or they're practically short stories. Like some of these are only 30, 40 pages long, and a good number of them are probably 100 or less than 100 pages or around 100 pages. So it's not like I read 42 like 500 page chunky books in the first 3 months of the year. So just in case anyone's wondering. After I've gone through all 42 books initially, I'm going to go ahead and highlight some of my favorite books of the year so far and some of my biggest disappointments. And I won't do like full reviews on them either at that point, but spend a little more time just giving them a bit of spotlight time. I will also put the star rating somewhere on the screen so you can see, but in case you are new here or in case you haven't heard me say this in another video, my star ratings are very fluid. What I rate a book or what I consider a book might change from day to day, just depending on my mood or whatever, so don't put too much weight on that, but I will include those in case you're someone who likes to see star ratings. So let's jump into it with the books that I read in January. First, I have A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett. Yes, if you want a murder mystery in an eerie, layered, disturbing world with colorful, hilarious characters and an intentionally unraveled mystery that takes place in a world with gargantuan sea monsters and Attack on Titan-esque walls and stakes. Know if you can't deal with any elements of body horror or if you just don't like mysteries in general. I gave this 4.5 stars. Next, I have Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulet. Yes, if you are interested in a crime thriller set in an indigenous community and if you are interested in reading about some of the modern day struggles of the Ojibwe people. Know if you don't do YA at all or if you are very, very sensitive to certain content warnings. I gave this book 4 stars. Next, I have If We Were Villains by ML Rio. Yes, if you are trying to read all the dark academia out there, regardless of my opinion. No, if you want to avoid the distasteful and stereotypical handling of the only character of color. No, if you want to avoid insensitive inclusion of disordered eating. And no, if you need character actions to be tied to believable motives. In case you couldn't tell, I did not like this book, and I go back and forth between giving it a 1.5 or 2 stars. But for today, I'm feeling 1.5, so I'll put 1.5 stars for this book. Next in January, I had Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro. Yes, if you like gothic, atmospheric, dark fantasy with a large cast of characters that have found family dynamics and complex antagonists. No, if you can't handle any gore or violence, and no, if you don't want to read a book where a large portion of the cast is made up of children. I enjoyed this. I gave this book 4 stars. Alright, next we have In the Absence of Men by Philippe Besson. Yes, if you want to be as uncomfortable as I was when I was reading this book. Know if a deeply questionable and unethical relationship between a 45-year-old man and a 16-year-old boy is not what you want to read about. I'm so sorry, I don't even know how to seriously recommend this book, and it goes back and forth between a 1.5 or a 2 star for me, but for today I will say 1.5 stars. Moving along, Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. Yes, if you want a sweeping, lyrical, epic fantasy about 2 young men smuggling a goddess across the country in a story that feels like a beautiful fable. Yes, if you're down for a story with an unapologetically experimental narrative structure that might initially be a little disorienting. No, if you are absolutely not down for an experimental narrative structure, this one is one that is kind of funky and can be a little confusing at first. I personally love this book, would highly recommend, 4.5 stars. Next, I'm going to talk about a collection, and technically I did read the short stories in this collection spread through multiple months, but just to keep it concise and to organize it, I'm going to talk about them all now. These are all of the short stories, novellas, whatever you want to call them, in the collection of sci-fi stories. We had Arc, You Have Arrived, The Last Conversation, Randomized, Summer Frost, and Emergency Skin. Yes, if you're just starting to dip your toes into sci-fi and want to be introduced or get a taste of some of the popular sort of tropes or topics in the genre. No, if you have been in sci-fi for a while and feel like you're pretty familiar with the popular tropes, I wouldn't say that any of these stories, other than Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin, felt particularly original. They used pretty well used and well known framings, and none of them felt particularly new to me. But then we have Such Small Hands by Andres Barba. Yes, if you want eerie, disturbing fiction that explores some of the darker sides of child psychology. No, if you despise second person point of view and if you are just not interested in having any disturbing content with children in your books. 3.5 stars for me. Then I read Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Yes, if you want to do a earnest and heartfelt deep dive into mosses and hear about them in the context of indigenous traditions and indigenous wisdom. No, if you have absolutely zero interest in botany or the science of plants. I love Robin Wall Kimmerer. I gave this book 4 stars. Then I read North to Paradise by Usman Umar. Yes, if you want to read a memoir about a harrowing and humanizing migrant experience that highlights both the lows of human cruelty and the highs of human kindness and connection. No, if you must have lyrical writing. The writing in this book was very straightforward and undecorated. I've more or less stopped rating memoirs, but I would highly recommend. Moving on to The Pachinko Parlor by Elisa Shua Dusapin. Yes, if you want to try a quiet and contemplative story about identity and family and diaspora, which follows mainly a Korean family in Japan. No, if you don't like subtle writing that requires the reader to read between the lines, or if you very much prefer character emotions or subtext to be laid out pretty explicitly. I gave this 4 stars. Then the final book I read in January was Some Are Always Hungry by Cheon Yoon. Yes, if you enjoy identity-tied, identity-informed poetry and want to read about the Korean or Korean American experiences and trauma with food as an anchor point for the poems. No, if you don't like poetry or if you generally avoid trauma-informed writing, I gave this 4 stars. That wraps up January. Now we're going to hit the books that I read in February. I started off February with Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang. Yes, if you want a grotesque and intriguing thriller that critiques beauty standards, Eurocentric beauty standards, the beauty industry, and looks at the exploitation of the bodies of women of color, and also has the portrayal of a very loving immigrant family. No, if you don't like your books or thrillers to lean a bit into the absurd. Had a great time, 4 stars. After that, I read Lie With Me by Philippe Besson. Yes, if you want a bittersweet story and a story about the queer life unlived. No, if you don't like slightly pretentious prose, or no, if you're like me and you're reading this after In the Absence of Men, and even the mention of a man having an attraction to a boy, even mistakenly, is a no for you. Next, I read the entire First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. Yes, if you're really new to grimdark or are interested in trying out a longer multi-point of view story or series. No, if you want fresh character types, there are pretty standard character archetypes used in this story. No, if you want a strong plot. No, if you want well-developed character arcs and a lot of character change. No, if you want complex female characters who don't feel like caricatures. You can probably tell I personally didn't enjoy this series and I don't really understand the hype around it. I gave this 2.5 stars. Moving along to Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno. Yes, if you want a fever dream of a techno thriller that is really at its core a story about grief. No, if you want a really clear ending, or if you are currently avoiding stories that have to do with grief or loss. Next, I picked up Educated by Tara Westover. Yes, if you want to read a memoir about complicated and toxic family dynamics, and also the power of knowledge and education. No, if you don't like memoirs, or if you are very sensitive to violence in families, or if you are turned off by the fact that the author does admit that some of the events in the books are based on her memories and may not be entirely accurate. Again, I don't really rate memoirs, but I enjoyed and would recommend this. After that, I read Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Yes, if you're a fan of the movie and you want to read the source material, or if you're in the mood for a cozy fantasy story with imaginative characters and fun world building. Know if you're a movie purist because the movie and the book are different creatures. Also know if you're looking for a romance heavy fantasy. I love the movie, I love the book, 4 stars. Then we have the Fractured Fable series by Alexi Harrow, and this is Spindle Shattered and Mirror Mended. Yes, if you are an Alexi Harrow completionist, or if you are a huge fan of fairy tale retellings. No, if you don't like a very modern voice. I love Harrow, but I found that the voice and type of writing that she used for this wasn't quite to my taste. 3 stars. After that, I read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Yes, if you want to be emotional about the loving and generous and reciprocal relationship that humans used to and could have again with the rest of the natural world, told from the point of view of an indigenous botanist. No, if you don't care about the world or a place in it. No, if you don't like nonfiction, I guess. I don't know. I feel like even if you don't like nonfiction, I would still really recommend that you read this book. This was a reread for me, and even on the second read, 5 stars. Next, I'm going to talk about the 4 books in the Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante. Technically, I read the last 2 books of this series in March, so we're moving into the books I read in March, but I will review all of them just as a unit. Yes, if you want to be really freaking frustrated at layered and complicated human beings and want a character-driven story that spans many decades. No, if you want really fast-paced, plot-driven stories or prefer likable characters. The characters made me so mad at multiple points, but I really enjoyed the series. 4 stars. After that, I read Kim Ji-young, born 1982 by Cho Nam-ju. Yes, if you want to read about sexism and patriarchy and the way those things manifest in Korea, or if you just want a entry point into conversations on things like gender inequality or gender roles. No, if you're looking for something really revolutionary or new in terms of feminism or gender inequality. The power of this, I think, is in its directness, but the observations aren't necessarily going to be mind-blowing to anyone who has been in this sphere. 3.5 stars. Alright, now we have Night and the Butcher Bird by Alexi Harrow. Yes, if you want a short and powerfully written post-apocalyptic love story with lesbians and shape-shifting demons. No, if you don't like short stories, or no, if you need a really technical and explained magic system. Love, love, love this. 4 stars. Next is Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. Yes, if you like lyrical romantasy and love stories with gods and aren't too fussed about strong character work or really grounded chemistry. But no, if you do need very grounded, well-developed, believable relationships and multi-dimensional characters. Depending on when you ask me, this is either like a 2.75 or 3 stars. I'll give it 2.75 today. Then we have Six Deaths to Saint by Alexi Harrow. Yes, if you want a tragic, bittersweet love story with stunning writing and some timey-wimey stuff. No, again, if you need very technical world building or magic systems, or if time shenanigans really confuse you and you don't enjoy that. I love this. 4.5 stars. Then another book by Alexi Harrow, The Everlasting. Yes, if you want a stunning love story that smashes mainstream heteronormative romantasy tropes and archetypes with lovely writing, memorable characters, and more time shenanigans. No, if again you absolutely can't stand timey-wimey stuff. And no, if you absolutely hate, despise slightly heavy-handed delivery of themes. I love this book. 5 stars. Moving on to Nightcrawling by Layla Motley. Yes, if you want a rather brutal look at the life of a girl in Oakland trying to save herself and those around her from poverty. Yes, if you want breathtaking poetic prose and a really strong sense of place. No, if you want positive depictions of sex work or positive depictions of the agency of sex workers. I thought this was really powerful. 4.5 stars. Next is If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. Yes, if you want a story that tackles a lot of things, including identity, privilege, toxic relationships, relationship to homeland, and the unreliability of readers. Yes, if you want a book that uses multiple unconventional narrative structures and has a potentially unreliable narrator. No, if you can't stand unlikable characters, and no, if you don't like experimental narrative structures. Next is a rough one, Shuggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. Yes, if you want heartache, Yes, if you want to grapple with questions of whether or not you can ever love someone into saving themselves, if you want to question if neglect and abuse can only ever exist in the absence of love. Yes, if you want a sensitive and soul bearing look at the limits and limitlessness of familial love. No, if you don't want to engage with sympathetic portrayals of neglectful parents or people with addiction. I would also just generally check trigger and content warnings. I personally really enjoyed this book. I don't know if this is 4.5 or 5 stars. I go back and forth every day. I'm gonna give it 5 stars for now. That brings us to the last book of March and the final book for this wrap up, that is Sea Change by Gina Chung. Yes, if you're looking for a pretty quiet story with complicated family relationships, and yes, if you have pretty different tastes from me. No, if you want a story with any sort of building tension, because this to me felt like just one long flat line and it didn't live up to the potential of its really interesting premise. I'm sorry this wrap up portion is ending on a bit of a negative note, but this got 2 stars for me. So those are all the books I've read so far in the year, and if I were to highlight some of the books that disappointed me the most, I would have to say If We Were Villains, In the Absence of Men, the entire First Law trilogy, and Sea Change were the books that I probably enjoyed the least so far. There are some books in that sci-fi collection that I also was disappointed by, but they were so much shorter that I'm less upset with them. I didn't dedicate as much time to them. So yeah, these books I disliked for multiple reasons. I've talked about them in all of my monthly wrap-ups, so if you're interested in getting more of a deep dive into me ranting about what I didn't like about these books, you can check out the monthly wrap-ups. I'll have them linked in the description. But let's end this on a high note. I want to talk about the books that I have loved so far this year. I've honestly been having a really good reading year, and there are a lot of books that I would highlight, but if I really just had to pick my top favorites, they would be A Drop of Corruption, The Spear Cuts Through Water, The Everlasting, and Shuggie Bain. Yeah, I love all these books so much for different reasons, and if you want to, once again, get my full thoughts on them and hear me rave about them or cry about them, you can either go to the monthly wrap-ups, or for The Everlasting, I have a reading vlog. But that is it. I hope you made it through. I feel like for having to review 42 books, I managed to keep that pretty concise. We'll see when I edit it if it actually is as short as I think it is. I hope you enjoyed this structure, this sort of yes if, no if way of reviewing the books, because I think if people enjoyed that, that's probably exactly what I'll do for the next quarterly check-in, which will be at the end of June or the beginning of July. If you absolutely despise the yes if, no if way of doing this, let me know. I can try and think of something else. Either way, let me know in the comments what your favorite and most disappointing reads of this year have been so far. I would love to hear. Thank you again for being here for my first ever quarterly wrap-up on this channel. Thank you for subscribing, for watching, for liking. I appreciate every single one of you. As always, happy reading. I will see you in the next one. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this structure, this sort of